just 2 days after the IPCC called climate change a code red for humanity, Europe has recorded, if confirmed, its highest ever temperature. 48.8 degrees Celsius has been recorded in Sicily. Temperatures were rising throughout the day, leading to the government to declare a state of emergency. Tonight, we'll focus on how worried we should be by today's mercury-busting record and ask how prepared is Europe as things get hotter and hotter. The situation in Italy comes hand in hand with Greece facing an unprecedented natural disaster, the words of the Greek Prime Minister, as the world watches the more than 580 wildfires which have burned across the country since last month. Well, with me in the studio is the meteorologist Scott Duncan. But let's start tonight by crossing to Sicily and joining Fabrizio Basili, a Manchester resident who's visiting family on the island. Thank you so much for joining us, Fabrizio Basili. Describe the atmosphere where you are.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, absolutely. It's really hot. Today has been incredibly hot. Starting this morning, as soon as I got up, I saw the temperature was about 50 degrees in the balcony. Which is unbearable. It's really difficult to breathe. So even going outside, it has that sort of warm wind, just almost like a Scirocco wind, and it makes it really, really hard to breathe. Yeah, it's been really extreme.
And tell me, how are people reacting, and have there been any pieces of advice from the authorities?
Not at the moment, no, only for the elderly to stay inside and cool down. But the infrastructure is a little bit old and dated, and we can only rely on the aircon system that we have in some of the homes. So luckily where I live, we have aircon, but clearly it's not the best solution for the planet.
So the aircon is on all the time at the moment?
It is, yeah, probably about 24/7, to be honest, because you cannot live without it. Even fans or anything like that, just, yeah, not enough to cool down the room.
Now, you have been used to, you come from Sicily, though you live here, you've been used to warm temperatures in the summer. But do you think now you've got a change of mindset about how healthy it is to have extreme heat? Well, obviously you didn't expect it to be quite as hot as this, but you've seen temperatures rising.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember when I was here, I left the country 18 years ago, but I come back every summer. And I do remember how different it was in the past years, to be honest. And this year alone, we've seen a massive rise of temperature starting from around June, which is kind of unusual. They usually start around July, August.
Thank you very much, Fabio, for joining us.
Thank you.
Scott Duncan, if I can turn to you now, where is the intensity, this kind of intensity, coming from?
Well, it's a good question. Across the Northern Hemisphere, we've seen a lot of heat records falling. We've had Canada, for example, in June, which was unprecedented. We've had a lot of heat in Northern Europe, recently Turkey, Greece and the southeast. But now more recently, we've had this heat kind of spreading out of North Africa under this very intense heat dome, as we would say. The intensity of these heat waves are always increasing, and that's something that we've seen over the last few decades in particular. But this intensity on a local scale for Sicily's quite an interesting place. So we've got an extreme weather event, but the fingerprints of climate change are all over these records as they all seem to break.
And of course, and as Fabio said, the infrastructure is creaking to be able to deal with it. The aircon's on 24 hours a day. Yeah,
I couldn't even imagine personally, even when it gets hot. In London, for example, we struggle. If you live on a top floor, for example, and you've got Velux windows, it's quite oppressive. I couldn't even imagine what the high 40s is like to live in. So
do you think we're now facing this new pattern in southern Europe? I mean, it's been year on year.
To be specific about one part of the Northern Hemisphere or any part of the globe, it's quite difficult. But we are seeing an increase in these intensities and frequency of these heat waves, across the globe. So it's not just southern parts of Europe. Obviously, southern parts of Europe are particularly exposed to North Africa.
And we're going to be coming on to talk about Greece and the wildfires. And of course, we had massive fires in France too. So are we going to see wildfires in southern Europe as just being part of summer?
Yeah, well, could be, yeah. So obviously it's not the heat that triggers the fires themselves, but it dries out the vegetation and just makes it a lot easier to burn faster and more intense. So when we get fires, they're more likely to really blaze up.
But if climate change is playing into this, what are we likely to see in the next year, 2 years, 3 years?
I mean, in the next few years, we could see more of the same. further afield, it's very difficult to put a finger just on how things will go. But yeah, it's that trend of increasing.
And do you think that there's any mitigating that infrastructure can really do to combat this now?
It's a difficult question, probably for someone in this kind of policies on how we can, implement, change and on how to prevent wildfires. But obviously, if places are drying out and getting hotter than they were in the past, it's adaptation in those places and just being aware and being educated on, what's actually going to be happening in the future and just being aware of these records that are falling, for example.
Thanks very much indeed. Well, let's turn to Greece now and the situation there as wildfires rage. The blazes have forced thousands to flee their destroyed properties and land. Hundreds of fires are still burning after more than a week. Firefighters have arrived from the UK, from France and Germany, but local people have taken matters into their own hands in the absence of help. In a moment, we'll discuss the impact these fires are having on Greece and ask how concerned should we be about this type of temperature being recorded. But first, an insight into those fighting the flames themselves. This is the story of the supermarket worker Spyros, captured by Aman Okar, who spoke to him in North Greece.
Παρακεί το γεγονός ότι είμαστε μια περιοχή που έχουμε πολύ πράσινο και όλος ο κόσμος μας, τόσα χρόνια ο τουρισμός μας και αυτά ερχόταν για αυτό το πράγμα, αυτό πουλάγαμε στην ουσία. Και έχω μάθει από μικρό παιδί, εδώ πέρα που μεγάλωσα, την περιοχή έτσι. Δεν θέλω να τη δω μαύρη, όπως έχει γίνει αυτή τη στιγμή. Και αυτό είναι όλο. Δεν θέλω να χαθεί όλο αυτό. Τα συναισθήματά τους είναι οργή, θλίψη, θεωρώ, αγανάκτηση και αυτά, γιατί πραγματικά δεν υπήρχε βοήθεια από κανέναν, ειδικά από το κράτος. Όλοι παλεύαν μόνοι τους και οι περισσότεροι έχουν καταστραφεί. Τα χωριά κυρίως που ήταν πιο ψηλά που έγινε μεγάλη ζημιά. Σπίτια κάηκαν, το βιός του καθενός, άλλοι με τα ζώα τους, με τα δάση τους, τα χάσαν όλα, καταστράφηκαν. Πάμε να προλάβουμε τη φωτιά, να μην έρθει από εδώ. Να μην προχωρήσει η φωτιά καθόλου προς το βουνό μες στο χωριό. Δεν ήξερα ούτε η δουλειά μου είναι πυροσβέστης, ούτε τίποτα. Απλά ένιωθα ότι ο τόπος με χρειάζεται καθώς ξεκίνησαν όλα αυτά και το έκανα. Πολεμάω τις φωτιές, το μόνο που σκέφτομαι είναι ότι το καίγεται το σπίτι ενός ανθρώπου που μπορεί να γνωρίζω ή να είναι κάποιανού φίλου μου ή κάποιανού μέσα από το σόι μου. Νιώθω υπόχρεος, πρέπει να το κάνω, όπως εγώ και άλλα παιδιά. Και αυτό, εμένα προσωπικά ούτε το σπίτι μου κάει και ούτε τίποτα. Απλά πήγαινα καθαρά να βοηθήσω τον συνάνθρωπό μου εδώ πέρα στην περιοχή, γιατί από κάπου αλλού δεν είχε βοήθεια. Ό,τι μπορέσαμε μόνοι μας το κάναμε.
Τα παιδιά είναι απίστευτα. Αν δεν ήταν όλα τα παιδιά να βοηθήσουν, δεν υπήρχε περίπτωση. Θα είχαν καεί τα πάντα. Όντως, θα είχαν καεί τα πάντα.
Που έχουν γίνει είναι πρωτόγνωρα για μας, τους νέους τουλάχιστον. Μερικοί πιο παλιοί τα έχουν ξαναδεί. Αυτό, βλέπω τον κόσμο και πραγματικά με στεναχωρεί όλο αυτό και δεν ξέρω πόσο καιρό θα πάρει για να ξαναέρθει στα ίσα της εδώ η περιοχή. Από τότε που ξεκίνησαν οι φωτιές εδώ πέρα στην περιοχή, γενικά ο κόσμος, οι συγχωριανοί και ξένοι, Αθηναίοι, όλοι δείξαν το ενδιαφέρον τους. Συνέχεια ο κόσμος ήταν δίπλα μας, με τον τρόπο του καθένας και ό,τι μπορούσε. Ερχόντουσαν, μας φέρανε φαγητά, νερά. Συνέχεια ήταν δίπλα μας, μας ρωτάγανε, υπήρχε ενδιαφέρον, τι χρειαζόμαστε, τι όχι. Έξω μας αντιμετωπίζουν αλλιώς ότι έχουμε σώσει εμείς την περιοχή και όντως εμείς μεταξύ μας και τα παιδιά τα άλλα έχουμε σώσει την περιοχή. Γενικά υπάρχει πολύ καλή αντιμετώπιση από τους Συγχωριανούς. Έλα μπα. Εδώ τώρα πάμε μια καμάρια προς τα πάνω. Στις φωτιές, ναι. Γενικά όχι μόνο οι γονείς μου, αλλά όλο μου το σόι. Με παίρνουν συνέχεια τηλέφωνα, μας πιάνουν κάποια πλάνα από κάποια κανάλια που είναι εκεί πέρα, μας βλέπουν στην τηλεόραση, με παίρνουν τηλέφωνο, κλαίνε, αγχώνονται. Συνέχεια μου λένε να προσέχω.
That was Spyros' story. Well, the Greek government has promised that any failures in their response will be identified, but responded to criticism by posting figures showing Greece well ahead of other Mediterranean countries for the number of water-bombing aircraft. Their spending on civil protection measures has increased by 56% in the past 3 years, with permanent and seasonal firefighter numbers up 16%. The Prime Minister, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, also announced this week a €500 million fund to provide relief and compensation for people who've lost homes and property in the wildfires that have hit the country. But is that enough? And are they prepared for any future climate emergencies? Well, joining me now is the Greek MEP, George Katos, who is a member of the governing New Democracy Party. Good evening. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. You heard Spyros there. You heard Spyros there, who's a supermarket worker who's got no training in firefighting, out doing an absolutely essential job, because if he and his friends didn't do it, other people wouldn't be able to do it, and there would be nobody else to do it. Do you think Greece has failed the population? I mean, are you embarrassed because the state isn't able to provide the firefighters paid and voluntary that are needed?
Yes, I think that this criticism is correct in general. We have a big success, quote unquote, in Greece, in the sense that we didn't have a lot of casualties as we had in 2007 and 2018. So as far as protecting human lives, we're rather well organized. But as far as protecting property and the environment in general, we failed, I believe, because this phenomenon is too big for us. We keep describing the problem, but we don't really have the solution. It is not only a problem for Greece, it's also for Italy, for Turkey, for Lebanon, for Algeria, for Spain. So I'm rather worried. We have to devise new strategies because we face new challenges.
And you were talking perhaps about a Europe-wide response, but just in terms of a response in Greece, in terms of your infrastructure, the infrastructure just cannot cope with this level of temperature. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that our infrastructure is rather antiquated. The way we are not well organized, but we cannot, let's say, what happens in Greece has to do with what happens in the European Union. Supposedly in the European Union, we implement a strategy of green transition. 37% of the financing of the European Recovery Fund will go to the so-called green transition. But we had a real bad start. We had a major ecological, environmental disaster in Greece, which affects the economy, affects tourism, affects the quality of life. And we also have problems in the sense that energy prices are going up. So how can people support a strategy that pushes up the prices of energy? It's very complicated. I believe that we'll do our best in order to cope with this very difficult situation, but success is not guaranteed.
Now, we know there's a state of emergency in Sicily, but I wonder, under a similar situation in Greece, whether you in the government could be directing people to actually take particular measures to protect themselves. I mean, these are obviously people, citizens out in the street trying to protect their property and their lives and other people's lives. But are there measures that can be taken short term about, I don't know, electricity blackouts, not using the aircon, not building up temperatures and so forth, making sure that everybody is very, very safe around their houses, just kind of civil defense in a way?
Yes, well, our major objective is protecting human lives, because we had a tragedy in 2018. We lost 130 compatriots, and we had another tragedy in the year 2007. So the priority of the present government is protecting, safeguarding human lives.
Yeah.
But this is not a global strategy, because you also have to protect houses, homes. I know too many people that lost everything. And you also have to protect the environment because the quality of life and even the perspective of the Greek economy depends on the quality of the environment.
And you talked about the Green Transition Fund being a European initiative, but actually much more critically and much more quickly, do you think, as you were able to do with COVID, that actually there should be a quick European response this summer to what's happening?
Well, there is civil protection at the European level, and there was a European reaction, but this supplements the national effort. If you can't solve the problem on a national level, you shouldn't expect the European Union to solve your own problem. This is the way the European Union functions. It supplements the national effort. So in Greece, we have to get much better organized because it seems from what you said before, and I fully agree, that these challenges will repeat themselves in the coming years.